Singapore reported 30 new COVID-19 cases today, including 3 in the migrant workers' dormitories and 18 in the community. 15 of these cases are linked to previous infections, with 8 detected during quarantine and 7 identified through surveillance. The Health Ministry added that there are currently 6 unlinked community cases. The other 9 cases were imported, 3 being returning Singaporeans or PRs. Meanwhile, Pizza Hut has deep cleaned 3 of its outlets after 6 COVID-19 cases were reported. The 3 outlets will remain closed for 2 weeks. With the number of COVID-19 cases linked to Gem and Westgate increasing to 50 cases as at Monday night, it has emerged that a hotel cleaner may be the source of that cluster. Based on MOH's investigations into the second largest active cluster here, the cleaner is a 53-year-old woman who works at Park Avenue, Rochester, a stay-home notice dedicated facility. On May 6th, she may have been the source of infection when she visited Westgate, and on May 7th, she was confirmed to have the virus. According to MOH, whole genome sequencing and phylogenetic analysis have shown that some of these visitors to Gem and Westgate have similar sequences to the cleaner. For a closer look, I'm joined by Professor Dale Fisher, an infectious diseases expert from the National University of Singapore's Yong Lin School of Medicine. He also chairs the National Infection Prevention and Control Committee. Welcome back, Professor. In light of this discovery by MOH that a hotel cleaner may be the source of the Gem Westgate cluster, and the measure to extend free testing to those who visited the malls between May 10th and last Saturday, Professor, what are the likely scenarios for transmission to happen in malls?
Thanks, Haryanto. In infection control, we talk about 3 modes of transmission, really. 1 is contact, 2 is droplet, and 3 is airborne. So droplet is perhaps the one people feel most comfortable with because that's where it's from a respiratory secretion. It generally travels about 1 to 2 meters, and people exposed to those sort of secretions, whether it's through coughing, sneezing, or as we now know, even talking and yelling, singing, this sort of thing, could well be exposed to COVID and develop disease. Now, with these more transmissible variants, particularly the B1617, that is so much more infectious that the other modes of transmission may come up and be more of an issue, such as contact and airborne. We do believe airborne can happen, but we don't believe it's common, and we think it's more common in settings of aerosol generating procedures in hospitals, especially. But it's possible in the community as well, although low in number. The contact transmission is when you might actually touch someone with COVID, or more subtly, you might touch a surface that's been contaminated by someone with COVID and catch it that way. So that's why we're always telling people to wash their hands and not touch their face. So the point I'm trying to make is those other 2, the airborne and the contact, you may not have been close or have a profound contact with the actual person that's transmitting the disease, because airborne can travel a distance, and obviously the contact, the person may have already left, and then you go and have that exposure.
Right. What about duration, Professor? In terms of brief exposure, is there a possibility then for a person to get infected through brief exposure, versus prolonged exposure, for example?
Well, I think this is right. We know that the more exposure, the more chance you've got of getting it, and that's why household clusters are so prominent, because you're living with that person, and obviously there's a big exposure and your chance of getting COVID is much higher. If it's a brief exposure, like just passing someone in the supermarket, then it's very unlikely. However, now that we know these variants are more transmissible, that you actually need less virus to cause disease, then yeah, one could easily argue that a lower exposure can lead to infection.
Right. Professor, now I want to talk about the daily figures. Now, looking at the daily figures, the number of locally transmitted COVID-19 cases has hovered between 20 and 30, while unlinked cases is maintained in the single digits. But of course, the number of clusters are increasing, with some clusters growing bigger by the day. Based on all this, Professor, what's your take on our current situation?
I think we would have been happy with this situation if we were offered it 2 weeks ago. The most important thing that we're seeing, or not seeing, should I say, is that we don't have that exponential increase. And when you've seen it happen overseas, particularly, and obviously in Singapore this time last year, that the numbers really climbed every couple of days. There were twice as many. So the fact that we're flat tells me that the interventions are working. It's still early days. We're only in, I think, the second week since all the new restrictions were brought in. And obviously, we'd like to see it come down. We think we're seeing the unlinked cases come down. So maybe the number of clusters is becoming more finite, if you like. But, you know, we don't need to get back to zero. If it rumbles along like this, I think we'd be okay. We just need to have a situation where the numbers aren't climbing to the point where hospitals are going to get overwhelmed and lots of people are going to die. And with our high vaccination rate of 35% of people having their first jab, and in fact 70% of over 60-year-olds having their first jab, this tells me that the likelihood of severe disease is actually much less. So what was a case a year ago doesn't have the same implications as a case now. So I think we would tolerate an ongoing rumbling of cases while people are getting vaccinated, so that in a few months when we are all vaccinated, then really cases in the community hardly matters.